Welcome to the show, everybody. This is your boy Lo Jackson coming to you live with the Only You podcast. Today, I want to read to you a book called Games People Play by Eric Berne. Eric Berne is a medical doctor. He was born May 10th, 1910, and his dash unfortunately ended on July 15th, 1970. He was a Canadian-born psychiatrist who created the theory of transactional analysis as a way of explaining human behavior. And today I want to tell you a little bit about transactional analysis because it could actually help you, because that's what this podcast is all about. It is encouraging, motivating, getting somebody to realize things that they do wrong or realize the games they play that, like the saying goes, you play dumb games, you win dumb prizes, But transactional analysis is a it's a psychoanalytic theory and method of therapy within social interactions or transactions. They are analyzed to determine the ego state of the communicator, whether the communicator is parent-like, childlike, or adult-like, as basis for understanding behavior. In transactional analysis, the communicator taught to alter the ego state as a way to solve emotional problems. The method deviates from Freudian psychoanalysis, which focuses on increasing awareness of the contents of subconsciously held ideas. Eric Berne developed the concept and prodigium of transactional analysis in the late 1950s. And remember, prodigium is like the way you think about something. And then you have a prodigium shift when someone tells you, like, you think this one person is up to no good, and then somebody tells you something else that in reality their behavior was warranted because they were actually going through something you had no idea about. And then you have a prodigium shift, because then you know other parts of the puzzle that was bothering you, and then you change your mind about things, and it changes you personally. It talks here about emotional blackmail. I wanted to read to you about that. I thought that was kind of wild. Emotional blackmail is a term coined by psychotherapist Dr. Susan Ford about controlling people in relationships, and the theory that fear, obligation, and guilt, in which it's like an acronym called FOG, so it's fear, obligation, and guilt, are the transactional dynamics. Remember, I just told you about transactional theory, so this is kind of based off of that. Transactional dynamics at play between the controller and the person being controlled. Understanding these dynamics are useful to anyone trying to extricate from the controlling behavior of another person and deal with their own compulsions to do things that are uncomfortable, undesirable, burdensome, or self-sacrificing for others. I think that was kind of important to include there. Effectiveness, a 1995 research article by the staffer of Consumer Reports with Martin Seligman, a consultant, addressed the psychotherapy conducted by a group of transactional analysis as more effective than that of groups of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, marriage counselors, and physicians, and that psychotherapy lasting more than 6 months is 40% more effective than that lasting less than 6 months. So I think that's something important to address, is if we address mental health issues head on for a solid 6 months when we're going through certain types of things in life, we're more likely to heal quicker and regain our strength and be able to understand that we're not in this life alone, and that all of us are going through something that the other one had no idea about. We just got to be there for one another through thick and thin sometimes. You never know what somebody else is going through. But back to Aaron Byrne, because today we're going to be reading Games People Play by Aaron. Actually, his real name is Eric. I call him Aaron. I went to school with Aaron Byrne. Sorry, you guys. My bad. Eric Leonard Bernstein. He was actually born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So, he passed away in Carmel, California in 1970. Byrne's theory of transactional analysis was based on the ideas of Freud, but was distinctly different. Freudian physical therapists focused on talk therapy as a way of gaining insight to their patients' personalities. So all those movies you guys seen with them people laying on those beds, that's a Freudian way of, like when the counselor's talking to them in the movies and then they're talking back to them. That was a Freudian idea. Byrne believed that insight could be better discovered by analyzing patients' social transactions. So there is a lot to be said about people in society. And I do feel that with technology, you see kids in public and families at restaurants now, everybody has a phone in their face and everybody's downloading so much information. As human beings, for the first 7 years, from 1 to 7, that's practically all we do is download information into our brains. And we then figure out ways to disperse that information. And that's why a lot of people don't understand that social interactions is a way to heal the soul and learn to grow, but also learn new things and see things that may make you think differently about other things that are going on with you, or you can relate to something because you know somebody that is similar to somebody you see in a social situation. There are many different things that people go through that we have no idea about. Eric Byrne was born Montreal, Quebec. Like I said that. He was the son of David and Ethel Bernstein. He was a medical doctor, general practitioner, and Sarah Gordon Bernstein, a professional writer and editor. His only sibling, his sister Grace, was born 5 years later. The family immigrated to Canada from Poland and Russia. Both parents graduated from McGill University in Montreal. Eric was close to his father and spoke fondly of how he accomplished his father on rounds traveling by horse-pulled sleigh on cold Montreal winters to visit patients. Byrne's father died of tuberculosis when Byrne was 11. His mother then supported herself and her two children working as an editor and writer. She encouraged her son to follow in his father's footsteps and study medicine. Byrne received his bachelorette degree in 1931 and a medical degree and a Master of Surgery degree from McGill University Medical School in 1935. Byrne came to the United States in 1935 when he began an internship at Inglewood Hospital in New Jersey. After completing his one-year internship in 1936, he began his psychiatric residency at the psychiatric clinic of Yale University School in Medicine, where he worked for 2 years. And I do want to say about advanced education, it really does change your prodigiums so hard when you learn things that others have done before us in time, past times. It's like, wow. Or just the intricacies of architecture that you see out into the world, the big skyscrapers you see, that's like geniusness. In 1939, Byrne became an American citizen and shortened his name from Eric Leonard Bernstein to Eric Byrne. In 1949, he was admitted as fellow in the American Psychiatric Association. From 1938 to 1940, Byrne was assistant physician at Ring Sanitarium, Arlington Heights, Massachusetts. And I want to say to you guys that sanitariums at one point really weren't accepted in the United States. They wound up turning them quickly into asylums at one point. And sanitarium was was sanatoria at one point, and it was where they took people who were convulsing or ill-behaved. From 1940 to 1943, he was employed as a psychiatrist in a sanitarium in Connecticut and concurrently as a clinical assistant in psychiatry at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. He also maintained a private practice. And remember, private practice means he's practicing. And you got to think about that too when you're choosing doctors in the world. If you're driving down the street and it says practicing, DO, do you want to go there and let them practice on you? Maybe I would, if you, something serious, I would want to go to somebody where it says, just DO at the end and not practicing. In 1943, during World War II, Berne joined the United States Army Medical Corps and served as a psychiatrist. He rose from the rank of lieutenant to captain and then to major. Assignments include Spokane, Washington, Fort Ord, California, and Brigham City, Utah. After his discharge in 1946, he settled in Carmel, California, and resumed his psychoanalytic training that he had begun in New York City prior to the war at the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Society and Institute. During 1947 through 1949, Berne studied under Erik Erikson. And Erik Erikson was a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst who was well known for his theory on psychoanalytical development of human beings. He coined the phrase identity crisis. In psychology, identity crisis is a stage theory of identity development where it involves resolution of conflict over the 8 stages of the lifespan. I think that was important to learn there, you guys. In 1943, during World War II, Berne joined the United States Army Medical Corps and served as a psychiatrist. I read that to you guys. Sorry about that. He took on an appointment in 1950 as assistant psychiatric general ward at a Mount Zion Hospital, San Francisco, and simultaneously began serving as a consultant to the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army. In 1951, he accepted a position of adjunct and attending psychiatrist at the Veterans Admission and Mental Hygiene Clinic in San Francisco. The years from 1964 to 1970 were restless ones for Berne. His personal life became chaotic, if I could talk, sorry. His personal life became chaotic, and he concentrated on his writing. And now I want to read to you guys Games People Play by Eric Berne. Let's go ahead and start here on chapter 1, if it'll let us. Thank you guys for listening to the Only You podcast. And actually, I'm going to start with the introduction here. Sorry about that. As if suddenly a door. James Allen, M.D. On a cold winter morning 40 years ago, my supervisor gave me a copy of Games People Play, remarking that despite the book's strange name, its author had given psychiatry the wheel. At the time, I was a first-year psychiatric resident at McGill University in Quebec, and my supervisor, Heinz Lehmann, MD, was arguably the best influential psychiatrist in North America. A few years before, he had introduced the use of Thorazine for the treatment of schizophrenia in North America. And remember, now we know that schizophrenia is brought on by major stress, and it's a personality disorder. A step that revolutionized treatment of the serious mentally ill. Neither Dr. Lehman nor I realized then that Eric Berne grew up in Montreal and had graduated from McGill. 5 years later, while attending Berne's groups in San Francisco, I learned that our backgrounds were similar in other aspects. Our first degrees were in classics, and we shared a common interest in how the past affects people. Thank you guys for listening to Only You podcast. This is your boy Lo Jackson coming to you live, and today I am reading to you Games People Play by Berne. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for sharing me. Thank you for being a part of this. I haven't been out here in a minute. I've been taking a break, been taking care of stuff and doing stuff. I want to read some more to you about Games People Play. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to do chapter 1, Structural Analysis, Observation of Spontaneous Social Activity, most productively carried out in certain kinds of psychotherapy groups, reveals that from time to time people show noticeable changes in posture, viewpoint, voice, vocabulary, and other aspects of behavior. These behavioral changes are often accompanied by shifts in feeling. In a given individual, a certain set of behavioral patterns corresponds to one state of mind, while another set is related to a different psychic attitude, often consistent with the first. These changes and differences give rise to the idea of ego states. In technical language, an ego state may be described phenomenologically as a coherent system of feelings and operationally as a set of coherent behavior patterns. In more practical terms, it is a system of feelings accompanied by a related set of behavior patterns. Each individual seems to have available a limited rapport of such ego states, which are not roles by psychological realities. These rapports can be sorted into the following categories. 1. Ego states which resemble those of parental figures. 2. Ego states which are anonymously directed towards objective appraisal of reality, and those which represent archaic relics, still active ego states which were fixated in early childhood. Technically, these are called respectively extrophysic, neurophysic, and archaeophysic ego states. Colloquially, these exhibitions are called parent, adult, and child, and these simple terms serve for all but the most formal discussion. The position is then, at any given moment, each individual is in a social aggression will exhibit a parental, adult, or child ego state, and that individual can shift from varying degrees of readiness from one ego state to another. These objectives give rise to certain diagnostic statements. That is, your parent means you are now in the same state of mind as one of your parents, or a parental substitute used to be, and you are responsible as he would with the same posture, gestures, vocabulary, feelings, etc. That is your adult means. You have just made an autonomous, objective appraisal of the situation and are stating these thought processes or the problems you perceive or the conclusions you have come to in a non-prejudicial manner. This is your child means. The manner and intent of your reaction is the same as it would have been if you were a very little boy or girl. The implications are: 1. That every individual has had parents or substitute parents, and he carries within him a set of ego states that reproduce the ego states of those parents as he perceived them, and that these ego parent states can be activated under certain circumstances, extrophysic functioning. Colloquially, everyone carries his parents around inside of him. And I want to stop right there and say, check out a book called The Four Acknowledgements by Don Miguel Ruiz. He speaks in that book about when we're ages 3 and 4, we're the truest self that we can be because we have learned to speak and talk and, kind of communicate by then, hopefully. But at that time is when our parents start saying no, yes, and they start showing us and telling us what to do. So then that starts the domestication process as a human being. And I've said this before in other podcasts that, it's like when your dog is sitting on your lap and he goes, in psychology that's called a relief breath, and he is breathing like that because he is no longer wild, or they are domesticated. So at 3 and 4 we get domesticated and we take on, and this is in the book The Four Acknowledgements by Don Miguel Ruiz, we take on these ideologies of our parents and we create a judge and victim role in our minds, and we put our true selves in the corner. And I kind of see that Eric Berne kind of was leaning towards that, talking about the ego here. I find that relatively important to talk about that because I've seen this from another psychologist. He felt the same way as this guy, and his readings were, his findings were similar. I find it very interesting. Thank you guys for tuning in to Only You podcast. Number 2, that every individual, including children, the mentally retarded, and schizophrenics, is capable of objective data processing if the appropriate ego state can be activated, neurophysic functioning. Colloquially, everyone has an adult. And excuse me for using the terminology that was here, but this book was written in 1964, everybody. I'm sorry about that. It's actually, we use mentally challenged now, not mentally retarded. 3, that every individual was once younger than he is now, and that he carries within him fixated relics from earlier years which will be activated under certain circumstances. Archaeophysic functioning. Colloquially, everyone carries a little boy or girl around inside of them, and that's also, other psychologists call that your inner child. At this point, it is appropriate to draw figure 1, which is called a structural diagram. This represents, from the present viewpoint, a diagram of the complete personality of the individual. It includes his parental, adult, and child ego states. They are carefully segregated from each other because they are so different, and because they are so often quite inconsistent with each other. The distinctions may not be clear at first to an inexperienced observer, but soon become impressive and interesting to anyone who take the trouble to learn structural diagnosis. It will be convenient henceforth to call actual people parents, adults, or children with no capital letters. Parent, adult, and child capitalized will be used when ego states are referred to. Figure 1 represents a convenient, simplified form of the structural diagram, and it shows a picture and it says parental ego state, and it has a circle around that. So it's kind of like 3 circles on top of each other, and then it has a belt going around them all, and it says parental ego state, adult ego state below that, and then child ego state below that. And we all understand that hierarchy there, because that's a type of hierarchy to me when you stack it up like that. Before we leave the subject of structural analysis, certain complications should be mentioned. 1. The word childish is never used in structural analysis, since it has come to have strong connotations of undesirability and of something to be stopped forthwith or gotten rid of. The term childlike is used in describing the child, and that one is so hard for me to pronounce. Archaic ego state. Since it is more biological and not prudential, actually the child is in many ways the most valuable part of the personality and can contribute to the individual's life exactly what an actual child can contribute to family life, charm, pleasure, and creativity. If the child in the individual is confused and unhealthy, then the consequence may be unfortunate, but something can and should be done about it. 2. The same applies to the words mature and immature. In this system, there is no such thing as an immature person. There are only people in whom the child take over inappropriately or unproductively, but all such people have a complete, well-structured adult which only needs to be uncovered or activated. Conversely, so-called mature people are people who are able to keep the adult in control most of the time, but their child will take over on occasion like anyone else's, often with disconcerting results. And I think we all have ran into people out there that, have that dead set serious personality, and then when nobody's around they act totally childish, and it's it's interesting. We all have seen cousins like that, or siblings. 3, it should be noted that the parent is exhibited in 2 forms, direct and indirect, as an active ego state, as an influence. When it is directly active, the person responds as his own father or mother actually responded, do as I do. When it is an indirect influence, he responds the way they want him to respond. Don't do as I do as I say. In the first case, he becomes one of them. In the second, he adapts himself to their requirements. Thus, the child is also exhibited in 2 forms, the adopted child and the natural child. The adopted child is the one who modifies his behavior under the parental influence. He behaves as father or mother wanted him to behave, compliantly or precariously. For example, or he adapts himself by withdrawing or whining. Thus, the parental influence is a cause and the adapted child an effect. The natural child is a spontaneous expression, rebellion, or creativity, for example. A confirmation of structural analysis is seen in the results of alcohol intoxication. Usually, this decommissions the parent first so that the adopted child is freed of the parental influence that is transformed by release into the natural child. Wow, I never even thought like that, but that totally makes sense, don't it, to you guys? That's just unbelievable. Thank you guys for listening to the Only You podcast. Today we're doing Games People Play by Eric Berne. This is a good read, seriously. It is seldom necessary for effective game analysis to go beyond what has been outlined above as far as personality structure is concerned. Ego states are normal physiological phenomena. The human brain is the organ or organizer of physical life, and its products are organized and stored in the form of ego states. There is already concrete evidence for this in some findings of Penfield and his associates 1 and 2. There are other sorting systems of various levels, such as a factual memory, but the natural form of experience itself is in shifting states of mind. Each type of ego has its own vital value for human organism. In the child reside intuition 3, creativity and spontaneous drive and enjoyment. The adult is necessary for survival. And I do believe that. I mean, how could you survive without being somewhat of an adult or taking on what it... I mean, I do see a lot of people in the world, though, and maybe that's part of the psychological game of life, is that you have to learn to overcome certain situations that, like people say, I've just been dealt a bad hand. Thank you guys for listening to the Only You podcast. And it's not true. You've not just been dealt a bad hand. You got to take that hand and form it into whatever it is supposed to be as an adult. You can't always be a child, but you see some people out there being like that. Back to Games People Play by Eric Berne. The parent has two main functions. First, it enables the individual to act effectively as the parent of actual children, thus promoting the survival of the human race. Its value in this respect is shown by the fact that in raising children, people orphaned in infancy seem to have a harder time than those from homes unbroken into adolescence. Secondly, it makes many responses automatic, which conserves a great deal of time and energy. Many things are done because that's the way it's done. This frees the adult from the necessity of making innumerable trivial decisions so that it can devote itself to more important issues, leaving routine matters to the parent. Thus, all three aspects of the personality have a high survival and living value. And it is only when one or the other of them disturbs the healthy balance that analysis and reorganization are indicated. Otherwise, each of them, parent, adult, and child, is entitled to equal respect and has its legitimate place in a full and productive life. And thank you guys for listening to the Only You podcast. Chapter 2 goes like this. It's called Transactional Analysis. We talked about that earlier. The unit of social intercourse is called transaction. If two or more people encounter each other in a social aggression, sooner or later one of them will speak or give some other indication of acknowledging the presence of the others. This is called the transactional stimulus. Another person will then say or do something which is in some way related to this stimulus, and that is called the transactional response. Simply, transactional analysis is concerned with diagnosing which ego state implemented the transactional stimulus and which one executed the transactional response. The simplest transactions are those in which both stimulus and response arise from the adults of the parties concerned. The agent, estimating from the data before him that a scalpel is now the instrument of choice, holds out his hand. The respondent appraises this gesture correctly, estimates the force and distance involved, and places the handle of the scalpula exactly where the surgeon expects it. Next, in simplicity, are child-parent transactions. The fevered child asks for a glass of water, and the nourishing mother brings it. Both these transactions are complementary. That is, the response is appropriate and expected and follows the natural order of healthy human relationships. The first, which is classified as complementary transaction, type 1, is represented, and it shows a figure below. The second complementary transaction is type 2, and that's why everybody needs to rush out and buy this book or rent it and read it. It is evident, however, that transactions tend to process in chains so that each response is in turn a stimulus. The first rule of communication is that communication will proceed smoothly as long as transactions are complementary. And its corollary is that as long as transactions are complementary, communication can, in principle, proceed indefinitely. These rules are independently of nature and content of the transactions. They are based entirely on the direction of the vectors involved. As long as the transactions are complementary, it is irrelevant to the rule whether two people are engaging in critical gossip, parent-parent, solving a problem, adult adult, or playing together, child child, or parent child. If that is not interesting, I don't know what is. Because I see that in the workplace. So we all see that in the workplace all the time. And it isn't, and that's why, like, I feel like people feel uncomfortable sometimes when they come into certain situations, whether it be like with a cashier at a grocery store. It's like they don't look at you sometimes, so then it makes you feel all weird. And it's like, are you supposed to make eye contact? Are you not supposed to? The converse rule is that communication is broke off when a cross transaction occurs. The most common cross transaction, and the one which causes and always has caused most of the social difficulties in the world, whether in marriage, love, friendship, or work, is re-represented in Figure 3 as cross transaction type 1. This type of transaction is the principal concern of psychotherapists and is typified by the classical transference reaction of psychoanalysis. The stimulus is adult, etc., etc. Maybe we should find out why you've been drinking more lately, or do you know where my cufflinks are? The appropriate adult response in each case would be, maybe we should. I'd certainly like to know, or on the desk. If the respondent flares up, however, the responses will be something like, you're always criticizing me, just like my father did. Or, you always blame me for everything. These are both child-parent responses, and as the transactional diagram shows, the vectors cross. In such cases, the adult problems about drinking or cufflinks must be suspended until the vectors can realign. This may take anywhere from several months in the drinking example to a few seconds in the case of cufflinks. Either the agent must become parental as a complement to the respondent's suddenly activated child, or the respondent's adult must be reactivated as a complement to the agent's adult. If the maid rebels during a discussion of dishwashing, the adult conversation about dishes is unfinished, there can only ensue either a child-parent discourse or a discussion of a different adult subject, namely her continued employment. Too bad we don't have pretty much servants anymore. This was a really old book, so I don't think people still have servants. The converse of cross-transaction type 1 is illustrated in Figure 3b. This is the counter-transference reaction familiar to psychotherapists, in which the patient makes an objective adult observation and the therapist crosses the vectors by responding like a parent talking to a child. This is cross-transactional type 2. In everyday life, do you know where my cufflinks are? May elicit, why don't you keep track of your own things? You're not a child anymore. And it shows you another diagram below that read. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. This is a really great read. Hopefully you'll get out there and get it. Less ready for therapy. I jumped ahead a little bit. He can still get a divorce, but only at the expense of abandoning his position that he is really trying. If necessary, the wife can start the divorce, and her position is much improved since she really has tried. The favorable hope for outcome is that the husband, his game broken up, will go into a state of despair and then seek treatment elsewhere with genuine motivation. In its everyday form, this is easily observed in children as a two-handed game with one parent. It is played from either of two positions. I am helpless or I am blameless. The child tries but bungles or is unsuccessful. If he is helpless, the parent has to do it for him. If he is blameless, the parent has no reasonable grounds for punishment. This reveals the elements of the game. The parents should find out two things: which of them taught the child this game and what they are doing to perpetuate it. An interesting, though sometimes sinister, variant is "Look how hard I was trying," which is usually a harder game of the second or third degree. This can be illustrated by the case of a hard-working man with a gastric ulcer. Oh man, I used to have an uncle, I kid you not. One time he was out digging tile in the fields up in northern Illinois, and it had rained, but they had to get the job done, and he got down there and was digging out a trench, and the walls collapsed, shattered his ribs. I stayed the night that night, and I kid you not. And he went right back to work the next day, doing the same exact thing he was doing the day before, just wrapped it up. He had I can't remember, 10 broken ribs. He's lucky he didn't have a punctured lung. It was so crazy. But that's what that reminded me of. Sorry, I had to share that. And interesting, though sometimes sinister, okay, I read that. A man announces, okay. Sorry, you guys. And interesting, though sometimes sinister variant is "Look how hard I was trying," which is usually a harder game of the second or third degree. This can be illustrated by the case of a hardworking man with a gastric ulcer. There are many people with progressive physical disabilities who do the best they can to cope with situations, and they may enlist the help of their families in a legitimate way. Some conditions, however, can also be exploited for unadulterated purposes. Ulterior motives. First degree. A man announces to his wife and friends that he has an ulcer. He also lets them know that he is continuing to work. This elicits their admiration. Perhaps a person with a painful and unpleasant condition is entitled to a certain amount of ostentation as a poor recompense for his suffering. He should be given due credit for not playing wooden leg instead, and deserves some reward for continuing to assume his responsibilities. In such a case, the courteous reply to "Look how hard I am trying" is, "Yes, we all admire your fortitude and conscientiousness." Second degree. A man is told that he has an ulcer, but keeps it a secret from his wife and friends. He continues working and worrying as hard as ever, and one day he collapses on the job. When his wife is notified, she gets the message instantly. And we've all seen movies like this before. "Look how hard I was trying." Now she is supposed to appreciate him as she never has before, and to feel sorry for all mean things she has said and done in the past. In short, she is now supposed to love him. All previous methods of wooing her have failed. Unfortunately for the husband, her manifestations of affection and solitude at this point are more apt to be motivated by guilt than by love. Deep down, she is likely to be resentful because he is using unfair leverage against her and has also unfair advantages of her by keeping his illness a secret. In short, a diamond bracelet is much more honest an instrument of courtship than a perforated stomach, such as the option of throwing the jewelry back at him, but she cannot decently walk out on the ulcer. Sudden confrontation with a serious illness is more. Thank you guys for listening to the Only You podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, it's your boy. Come on back.